Mr President, as the Morrison government continues to congratulate itself on a job well done and use slogans and advertising to try to convince Australians that they are on top of our economic recovery, the truth about our economy right now is that people are hurting and they are worried about the future. The latest wage data shows that wages grew slower in the past 12 months than ever before. Now, it has been a tough year, but this data is off the back of years and years of stagnant wage growth under this government before the pandemic even hit. On top of low wage growth, we know that we have an insecure work crisis in this country. This pandemic highlighted this crisis and it has made it worse. We've got used to insecure work. We've almost come to accept it. And the workers that we needed to get us through the pandemic were some of the worst insecure work examples that we have seen. And that has impacted our health response. We've heard on many occasions of aged care workers and security guards who had to have a second job because their first job was too insecure and didn't provide the security that they needed of a full-time job. It's also impacted our economic response because it will take longer for our economy to recover if more jobs are insecure. The government chose to exclude casual workers from JobKeeper, and yet so many of the workers that were directly impacted by the shutdowns needed to get us through this pandemic were in highly casualised workforces. People in the arts and entertainment sector, hospitality workers, retail workers, all of these workers were already in casual and insecure work, and yet the government chose to exclude casual workers from the JobKeeper scheme. Our economy cannot recover if Australians don't have good, secure jobs. And maybe some of those opposite don't understand what it's like to have a casual, insecure job. But can I tell you, not knowing when your next shift is going to be impacts your entire life. And inversely, we know that a good, secure job gives you the confidence to spend money in your local businesses, in local shops, in your community. It gives you the confidence to pay for extra health appointments, to get checkups that you might need, to plan for the future, to save for a house, to make sure that you've got a good, dignified retirement. You can't do those things if you don't know when your next shift is coming. Workers around the country this Christmas won't be having a very good Christmas. They are not out there high-fiving about this government's so-called comeback. It won't be a great Christmas this year for workers in the mining industry who are facing the prospect of becoming permanent casuals. We know that casualisation has been rife in the mining industry for years, and this government has stood up and said they would do something about it. They don't say it here while they're standing in the chamber, but they say it when they're standing on the ground in central Queensland. The member for Dawson, Senator Canavan, often tells people from the mining industry that they will do something to fix casualisation. But when given the chance to do something about this, the government is actually intervening in a High Court case that would overturn a decision that stops mining companies from making workers permanent casuals. That is what the government is doing, and we need to judge the government on its actions, not what it says when it's standing in central Queensland. It won't be a great Christmas for workers who work for BHP under their OS Services Enterprise Agreement. They have had a win. They had the EBA overturned, and thank goodness, because this was a shoddy agreement to start with. It was agreed with a couple of people in Western Australia. 9 people decided what sort of EBA would apply to thousands of workers in central Queensland. But this government has done nothing nothing to step in and stop that sort of thing from happening, to stop casualisation in the industry, or to make sure that people have more secure work in these industries. It won't be a very good Christmas this year for workers in the meat and food processing industry. They have been incredibly hard hit by this pandemic. I had the chance to meet many of them in Brisbane last week, and I thank the AMI EU for giving me the opportunity to listen directly to those workers and to understand what they're going through in their workplaces. Most recently, at JBS Dinmore, they announced that 600 Australian workers have lost their jobs. 600 workers who won't have a job this Christmas. And when the government had the chance to extend JobKeeper to industries like the meat workers industry, to businesses like JBS, they didn't take that chance. Josh Frydenberg refused to sign. Those jobs could have been saved if this government had stepped in. And we know that Qantas workers will not be having a very good Christmas this year, because this week we found out that 2,000 ground crew jobs will be outsourced, and that includes 50 jobs in Cairns in regional Queensland, where I live. That doesn't mean, outsourcing doesn't mean that the work doesn't need to be done. I mean, we know that now. It doesn't mean that the job doesn't need to be done. It just means that Qantas is saying that we would prefer for that job to be done by someone who has a less secure job. A less secure job. And this government has turned its back on aviation workers. They've had plenty of subsidies and grants and even JobKeeper paid to Qantas. The business itself has said that it will be back in the black next year. But these workers won't have a job. They're having to bid for their jobs, and they're having to compete for jobs with people on labour hire contracts, casual employment, insecure work. This is, from the pandemic, we need to learn the lessons that this pandemic has taught us. And one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is that insecure work is damaging to the economy, it's damaging to the community, and we need to make sure people have secure jobs because it's good for our economy. All we have got from this government, from its leadership right down to its backbench, is more attacks on working people and more pushes to make sure that people have less secure work. Next week, they'll be bringing IR legislation out publicly for the first time, and we hear a lot from this government about everyone playing their part in this so-called Team Australia recovery. And they'll probably say things along the lines of, you know, what our economy and labour market needs is more flexibility. But can I tell you that flexibility is often a vehicle for increasing insecurity? It is the word that is used instead of insecurity. But when the government says flexibility, what they mean is insecurity. I was shocked today, to hear Senator Stoker, a Queenslander, actually blame Qantas workers for not accepting more flexible working conditions, leading to their own redundancies. She blamed them for their own redundancies because they hadn't accepted more flexible working conditions. Every time the government says flexible, what they mean is insecure. And insecure work is bad for workers, it is bad for families, but it is also bad for our economy. We have an opportunity at the end of this pandemic to make sure that more people are in secure jobs. But this government has shown through this pandemic that they are not willing to stand up for workers. They are not willing to do the hard work to make sure that people have good working conditions and good, secure jobs. And that is very concerning because what it means is that our economy and our recovery will take longer under this government, and people will not have the jobs that they need this Christmas to feel secure, to take care of their families and to plan for the future.